November 24th, 1971, Portland International Airport. A man in a dark suit and a black tie pays cash at the Northwest Orient counter for a one-way seat to Seattle and writes his name on the ticket as Dan Cooper. It is the day before Thanksgiving. Flight 305 is a Boeing 727 with 36 passengers aboard and a crew of 6, and it is going 30 minutes up the map to SeaTac. The man takes a seat near the back. He orders a bourbon and soda. He pays for it. He is somewhere in his mid-40s, ordinary looking in a way that nobody in the cabin will later be able to sharpen into a face. The aircraft lifts off at 2:50 in the afternoon. Shortly after that, the man hands a folded note to the flight attendant working the rear of the cabin, Florence Schaffner. She assumes it is a phone number. She puts it in her pocket without reading it. He leans toward her and tells her she had better look at it. The note said he had a bomb. Schaffner read it, and he told her to sit down beside him, and he opened a briefcase on his lap. She saw red cylinders and wire and a battery. Then he closed it and told her what he wanted. $200,000 in American currency in $20 bills. 4 parachutes, 2 main, 2 reserve. A fuel truck waiting at Seattle to meet the plane. She carried it to the cockpit. Captain William Scott radioed Seattle. Northwest Orient decided within minutes to pay, and while the money was being gathered, the 727 flew circles over Puget Sound for 2 hours, holding, with a cabin full of people who had been told there was a mechanical delay. On the ground, the FBI did the one thing in this entire story that would ever come back useful. They photographed every bill. 10,000 $20 notes, every serial number recorded before it left the bank. Almost none of it would be seen again. At 5:46 in the evening, the aircraft landed at Seattle-Tacoma. The money came aboard in a bank bag, roughly 20 pounds of paper. The parachutes came aboard, and all 36 passengers walked off into the terminal without knowing what they had been sitting inside for the last 4 hours. Schaffner went with them. So did Alice Hancock. The one crew member Cooper kept in the cabin was the other flight attendant, Tina Mucklow. Then he gave the cockpit his flight plan, and this is the part that tells you something about him. Southeast, toward Mexico City, 10,000 feet, no higher. Landing gear down. Flaps at 15 degrees. Airspeed as slow as the aircraft could legally hold, around 100 knots. Cabin unpressurized, and the rear stairs of the 727, the air stair under the tail, left unlocked. Every one of those settings does the same job. Together, they turn a jetliner into the slowest, lowest, most survivable platform a man can step off the back of. The crew told him the aircraft could not reach Mexico City in that configuration. He agreed to a fuel stop in Reno without arguing about it. They took off again at 7:40. There were 5 people on the aircraft now. Cooper sent Mucklow forward to the cockpit and told her to pull the curtain and stay there. She was the last person to see him. At about 8 o'clock, a warning light came on in the cockpit. The aft air stair was coming down. Scott called back on the interphone and asked if there was anything they could do for him. Cooper said no. At 13 minutes past 8, the tail of the aircraft pitched upward. A small change in trim that the crew felt in the controls and corrected without discussion. Somewhere over southwest Washington, in rain, in the dark, at 10,000 feet, in a business suit and a raincoat, with a bank bag tied to his waist, a man stepped off the stairs of a Boeing 727 and out of the record. Consider what that actually was. 10,000 feet over the Cascade foothills, in November, at night, in rain. The air outside the tail was below freezing and moving past at more than 100 miles an hour. He was wearing a business suit, a raincoat, and slip-on shoes. He had no helmet, no altimeter, no jump light, no reserve he trusted, and no way to steer the canopy he had chosen. He could not see the ground. He did not know what was under him. He stood at the top of a lit metal staircase hanging out the back of a jet, in the dark, and went. The aircraft landed at Reno at 11 with the stairs still hanging down and scraping the runway. Agents boarded. The cabin was empty. He left 4 things. A black clip-on necktie on a seat in row 18, a mother-of-pearl tie clip, 8 Raleigh cigarette butts in an armrest ashtray, and 2 of the 4 parachutes, one of them a reserve he had cut the shroud lines out of, apparently for cord, and 1 training rig that had been sewn permanently shut, which he had looked at and left behind. He also left a name that was not his. He had signed the ticket, Dan Cooper. In Portland that night, a reporter named James Long, writing against a deadline for the Oregon Journal, put it down as D.B. Cooper. A wire editor at United Press International repeated it, and every newspaper in America printed it the next morning, and it has never come off. The FBI did briefly question a Portland man whose initials really were D.B. and whose surname really was Cooper. He had nothing to do with it. The mistake outlived the correction. What followed was one of the largest manhunts in the history of the Bureau. It had a code name, Norjack, for Northwest hijacking. Agents walked the woods of Clark and Cowlitz counties. Soldiers from Fort Lewis searched the drop zone. Divers went into Lake Merwin. Over the next 4 decades, the Bureau would look at more than 1,000 people, and the file would grow to 66 volumes. They never found a parachute. They never found a body. They never found a suitcase, a jacket, a boot, or a piece of the $200,000 in any bank, any till, or any evidence room in the United States. Think about how little the Bureau physically had. A tie a man had taken off, 8 cigarette butts which were sent out for testing and then lost somewhere in the system before DNA work was possible. Fingerprints lifted from the cabin that have never been matched to anyone and that may not even be his. A composite sketch drawn from the memory of people who had spent the evening trying not to look at him. That is the entire physical description of the most famous unidentified man in American criminal history. The reason the search failed may be simpler than it sounds. Nobody actually knows where he jumped. The 813 pressure bump gives you a moment, not a map. The flight path was reconstructed after the fact from radar and from the crew's account, and the winds aloft that night were estimated, not measured, and a man under an unsteerable 26-foot canopy at night drifts wherever the air decides. The FBI's own search area was later argued to have been miles off. Every map you have ever seen of where D.B. Cooper landed is a map of where somebody guessed. Meanwhile, the idea worked. In 1972 alone, 15 people tried to copy it. The most capable of them was a Utah Sunday school teacher, Vietnam helicopter pilot, and Green Beret named Richard Floyd McCoy, Jr. On the 7th of April 1972, McCoy hijacked United Airlines Flight 855, another Boeing 727, demanded $500,000 and 4 parachutes, and jumped out of the back over Utah. He was arrested 2 days later. The Bureau matched his handwriting to the notes he left on the aircraft and a fingerprint to a magazine in his seat, and found the money in his house. He was sentenced to 45 years. He escaped from the federal penitentiary at Lewisburg in the summer of 1974 and was killed by agents in Virginia Beach that November. Remember him. He comes back. The airlines and the FAA drew their own conclusion, which was that the aft air stair of a 727 should not open in flight. A small hinged blade went onto the tail of every one of them, a mechanical lock that swings closed in the airflow. It is still there. It is called the Cooper vein. For 8 years, nothing. Then, in February of 1980, an 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was on the bank of the Columbia River at a stretch of sand called Tina Bar, about 9 miles downstream from Vancouver, Washington, clearing a spot for a fire. A few inches down, he uncovered 3 bundles of decaying $20 bills, still banded, 2 packets of 100, and one of $90. $5,800. The serial numbers matched. It is the only piece of the ransom that has ever been found, and it is the only physical thing in this case that has ever been proven to have touched the money. And it made everything worse. The bills were in sequence and still in their rubber bands, which is not how loose cash behaves in a river. 10 bar is not below the flight path. The bundles were buried under a layer of sand that some geologists who examined the site concluded had been deposited by dredging work in the mid-1970s, years after the hijacking, which would mean the money arrived there long after Cooper did. Other analyses disagree. Nobody has resolved it. A find that was supposed to close the case instead added a second mystery underneath the first one. That left the tie. In 2009, the Bureau invited an outside team led by a researcher named Tom Kay to look at the necktie with instruments that did not exist in 1971. They lifted more than 100,000 particles off it. Among them were 3 specks of a rare alloy of titanium and antimony, the kind of material handled in the early 1970s by a very small number of aerospace and metals firms. Kay's team suggested Cooper may have worked at Boeing or for one of its contractors. Later researchers argued for a Pennsylvania metals company called Remcrew. It is worth saying plainly what that is and is not. It is a theory built on 3 specs. The alloy itself dates from the mid-1950s. It narrows a field. It does not name a man. The names came anyway. A Northwest Orient purser and trained paratrooper named Kenneth Christensen, who the Bureau has said cannot be considered a prime suspect and who did not physically match the descriptions. A Special Forces parachutist named Theodore Braden, a leather worker named Lynn Doyle Cooper, put forward by his own niece in 2011. A conman named Bryant Kofelt, whose confession the FBI concluded was invented. Dozens more. Not one of them has ever been charged, and every one of them is a suspect only in the sense that somebody made an argument. On the 12th of July 2016, the FBI announced that it was standing down. Not solved, not closed, just no longer worked. 45 years of agents, and the Bureau moved them onto things that could still be finished. The 66 volumes went into the archive in Washington, where anyone can read them. Which should have been the end of it. In 2022, a retired pilot named Dan Grider went to a farm in Cove City, North Carolina, to an outbuilding on land that had belonged to Richard McCoy's family, and came out with a parachute harness and canopy. McCoy's children had kept it. Grider argued it was not the 1972 rig. He argued it was 1971. In 2024, the FBI took it. For about 2 years, the Bureau ran it. DNA, soil, fabric, everything a modern lab can do to 40-year-old nylon. The family waited. The internet waited. In December of 2025, agents drove the parachute back to Cove City and handed it to Richard McCoy III. According to the family, they were told the Bureau had gotten all the data off it that it could and that it was being returned. No finding, no statement, no charge against a man who has been dead since 1974 and could not be charged anyway. The case has not been reopened. $200,000 left Seattle on a Wednesday night in 1971, and 5,800 of it came back out of a riverbank 9 years later. Everything else is still out there. Or it rotted, or it burned, or it sat in a jar in somebody's garage for 50 years. The FBI gave the parachute back. It never said why.